He walked in covered in dust and walked out as the new owner of the most powerful bank in the country. Don't miss this video. A simple man, a forgotten will, and an inheritance no one expected. What happened in that boardroom made even the coldest executives tremble. Subscribe to our channel and watch how justice arrived dressed in humility. The morning unfolded over Chicago with a leaden gray sky that threatened to unleash its fury at any moment. The streets bustled with activity, indifferent to the drama that was about to unfold in the financial heart of the city. On the imposing Michigan Avenue, the main building of the National Credit Bank of America, rose like a colossus of glass and steel, a symbol of the power and wealth that many yearned for, but few could reach. Jack Miller crossed the avenue with tired steps. His worn boots left small traces of reddish dust, vestiges of the soil from his ranch in Kentucky. The wrinkles on his face told stories of endless days under the merciless sun, while his calloused hands evidenced years of hard work in the cornfields. His white shirt, though clean, showed patches and mends. His jeans were worn at the knees. Atop his head, a straw hat weathered by time completed the image of a simple man, a farmer who seemed out of place among the elegant buildings and executives in impeccable suits. However, in Jack's eyes shone something more than the characteristic humility of countrymen. There was determination, there was purpose, and above all there was knowledge of something that would forever change the course of many lives, especially his own. "Today's the day," he murmured to himself, while pressing against his chest a yellowed envelope that he carefully guarded in the inner pocket of his worn vest. That envelope contained a document that had reached his hands just 3 weeks ago, a document that still seemed part of an impossible dream. The bank's automatic doors opened before him, giving way to a world of polished marble, fine woods, and air conditioning. The contrast between his dusty figure and the immaculate interior of the bank did not go unnoticed. Several gazes fell upon him, some curious, others contemptuous. Jack removed his hat as a sign of respect, revealing well-groomed graying hair, and advanced toward the customer service area. Jessica Parker, the receptionist with a perfectly made-up face and impeccable nails, watched him approach with a mixture of bewilderment and disdain. In her 5 years working for the bank, she had learned to categorize clients in seconds. This man clearly did not belong to the preferred client category, not even remotely. "Good morning, sir. How can I help you?" she asked in a professional but distant tone, while her fingers continued typing on the computer, barely giving him a fleeting glance. "Good morning, miss," Jack responded with a measured but firm voice. "I need to speak with the branch director, Mr. Edward Wilson." Jessica raised an eyebrow, surprised by the direct request and by the fact that this farmer knew the director's full name. "Mr. Wilson is very busy today. Could you tell me the reason for your visit? Perhaps one of our advisors can assist you." Jack took the envelope from his vest and placed it on the counter. "It's a private and urgent matter. Please tell him that Jack Miller is here to see him." The way he pronounced his name with that serenity that only certainty gives made Jessica hesitate for an instant. However, her training and prejudices quickly took control. "I'm sorry, Mr. Miller, but I need to know the specific reason. Mr. Wilson doesn't receive anyone without a prior appointment." "I understand," said Jack, nodding slightly. "In that case, tell him I'm here about the inheritance matter of Mr. Alexander Foster. He'll know what I'm referring to." The name pronounced by Jack caused an immediate effect on Jessica. Mr. Alexander Foster had been the majority owner of the bank until his death a month ago. A legendary man in the American financial world, known both for his brilliance in business and for his eccentric and reserved character. "One moment, please," said Jessica, picking up the phone with slightly trembling hands. While dialing the director's extension, she observed out of the corner of her eye that strange visitor, who remained calm, contemplating with genuine curiosity the luxurious surroundings. On the upper floor, Edward Wilson reviewed the latest financial reports with a furrowed brow. Since Mr. Foster's death, uncertainty about the bank's future kept everyone on edge. As director of the main branch and the deceased magnate's confidant, Edward felt particularly pressured. The telephone ring interrupted his thoughts. "Mr. Wilson, excuse the interruption," Jessica began with an uncertain tone. There's a gentleman at reception, a Jack Miller, who insists on speaking with you about Mr. Foster's inheritance." Edward Wilson froze for a moment. The name wasn't familiar to him, but the mention of the inheritance activated all his alarms. "What does this man look like?" he asked cautiously. "Well, he looks like a farmer, sir. He's wearing worn clothes and is covered in dust, as if he had traveled a long way." Edward Wilson sighed with annoyance. Surely it was another of the many opportunists who had appeared since the news of Mr. Foster's death, some supposed distant relative or invented creditor. "Tell him to wait. I'll send security to escort him to my office," he responded coldly. Meanwhile, in the bank's lobby, Jack waited patiently. His thoughts traveled to his ranch in Kentucky, to the dry lands that barely provided enough to subsist, to his wife Margaret, who had encouraged him to undertake this journey despite his doubts, to his 3 children who depended on him. The letter he had received from the law firm had seemed so implausible that at first he thought it was a cruel joke or a scam attempt. But something inside told him it was true, that distant and almost forgotten relative had really remembered him in his final moments. 2 burly men in the bank's security uniform approached him with severe expressions. "Mr. Miller, Mr. Wilson will see you now. Please come with us," said one of them in a tone that suggested he had no other option. Jack nodded and followed them, aware of the curious glances that accompanied him on his journey toward the elevators. In his mind, echoed Margaret's words before departing. "Remember who you are, Jack. Don't let anyone make you feel less." The elevator closed behind them, taking him toward an encounter that would change not only his destiny, but that of the entire financial empire built by Mr. Alexander Foster. What no one in that elegant building could imagine was that beneath that humble appearance and those calloused hands was the new majority owner of the National Credit Bank of America. The elevator stopped smoothly on the 30th floor, where the executive offices were located. Jack observed with curiosity the digital panel that marked the floors, a technology that contrasted enormously with the simplicity of his life on the ranch. The doors opened, revealing a space radically different from the main lobby. Here, dark. Wood predominated, along with contemporary art paintings, and a silence only interrupted by the discreet typing of secretaries and the occasional murmur of telephone conversations. "This way," indicated one of the guards, guiding him down a carpeted hallway toward an impressive double door at the end of the corridor. Before they could reach it, an elegant woman in her 50s, dressed in an impeccable suit and with a hairstyle that denoted hours of effort, intercepted their path. Her expression of bewilderment upon seeing Jack was evident. "Who is this man, and why are you taking him to Mr. Wilson's office?" she asked with authority. It was Barbara Thompson, the director's personal assistant and zealous guardian of his agenda and space. "Mr. Wilson ordered us to escort him, Miss Thompson," replied the guard with deference. "He says he's here about Mr. Foster's inheritance matter." The woman narrowed her eyes, studying the visitor carefully. Jack held her gaze with serenity, without hostility, but also without submission. "Wait here," ordered Barbara, and without saying more entered the office, closing the door behind her. Inside the office, Edward Wilson was standing by the window that offered a panoramic view of Chicago. The gray sky had darkened even more, presaging the imminent storm. "Edward, there's a farmer outside who says he's here about Mr. Foster's inheritance," Barbara informed with a contemptuous tone. "Security has brought him here by your orders. Are you sure you want to see him? We could call the lawyers first." Edward turned slowly. At 45, he perfectly represented the image of the successful bank executive: tailored suit, luxury watch, and that air of confidence that only power gives. However, in his eyes, one could guess an uneasiness that he couldn't disguise. "Show him in, Barbara, and stay during the meeting. I want you to take note of everything." When Jack entered the office, he did so with the dignity of someone accustomed to facing difficult situations with integrity. He wasn't intimidated by the luxury or the scrutinizing looks. He removed his hat again and greeted with a slight nod. "Good morning, Mr. Wilson. Thank you for receiving me." Edward didn't immediately respond to the greeting. Instead, he gestured toward one of the chairs in front of his desk. "Have a seat, Mr. Miller, right? I understand you're here regarding a matter related to Mr. Alexander Foster. Jack sat down, placing his hat on his knees. That's right. 3 weeks ago, I received this letter from the Martinez and Associates law firm. He again extracted the envelope from his vest and extended it toward Edward. Attorney Robert Martinez informed me that Mr. Alexander Foster was my great-uncle on my mother's side, and that in his will he has named me the principal heir to his shares in this bank. Edward took the envelope with slightly trembling fingers. He knew well the letterhead of the prestigious law firm that had handled Mr. Foster's legal affairs for decades. Upon removing the document and reading it, his face went from incredulity to astonishment, and finally to a sickly pallor. This is impossible," he murmured, looking at Barbara, who was observing the scene with equal perplexity. "Mr. Foster never mentioned having family in Kentucky. He always said he had no direct heirs." Jack nodded with a serene expression. "I didn't know about him until recently either. My mother, Rose Foster, never spoke much about her family in the city. I know there was some conflict many years ago before I was born. She married my father, a humble rancher, against the will of her wealthy family and was disinherited. She never had contact with them again." Edward scrutinized Jack's face, looking for some resemblance to the deceased banker. To his dismay, he found several. The same firmness in the gaze, the same shape of the chin, even certain gestures that seemed unsettlingly familiar. "According to this document," continued Edward, trying to maintain his composure, "you would inherit 60% of the bank's shares. That would make you the majority shareholder, and therefore the de facto owner of the National Credit Bank of America." His voice had a tinge of incredulity that he couldn't disguise. "That's how Attorney Martinez explained it to me," confirmed Jack. "Although, to be honest, I don't fully understand what that means. I'm a countryman, Mr. Wilson. My life has been between furrows and cornfields, not between numbers and finances." At that moment, the office phone rang insistently. Barbara, still stunned by the revelation, answered automatically. Her expression changed upon hearing the voice on the other end of the line. "It's Attorney Martinez," she informed Edward, extending the receiver. The conversation was brief but intense. Edward listened attentively, occasionally nodding, while his face reflected growing alarm. When he finally hung up, he seemed to have aged 10 years in 5 minutes. "Attorney Martinez confirms everything. He's been trying to contact me since yesterday to inform us of your visit, Mr. Miller. Apparently, there was some problem with communications." Edward looked directly at Jack, evaluating him in a new light. "He also informs me that he's on his way with all the necessary documentation to formalize your position as the new majority owner of the bank." A heavy silence fell over the office, interrupted only by the patter of the rain that had begun to hit against the windows. The announced storm had finally arrived, both literally and figuratively. "Mr. Wilson," Jack finally spoke, breaking the silence. "I understand this situation is unexpected for everyone. Believe me, it is for me too. I never sought this, nor expected an inheritance of such magnitude. But now that it's here, I intend to honor my great-uncle's wishes and do the right thing with what has been entrusted to me." Edward studied the man seated before him. Beneath those worn clothes and those calloused hands, he began to glimpse something he hadn't initially noticed: dignity, intelligence, and an integrity that seemed almost anachronistic in the world of high finance where he moved. "Mr. Miller," Edward finally said, recovering part of his professional composure, "this will require an emergency meeting with the board of directors. There are protocols to follow, documents to review, legal processes to complete." "I understand," nodded Jack. "I'm willing to follow all the necessary procedures. I'm not in a hurry, Mr. Wilson. I've lived 58 years without knowing I was heir to a fortune. I can wait a few more days to do things correctly." The simple wisdom of that comment momentarily left Edward speechless. He was accustomed to dealing with ambitious executives, with impatient investors, with people for whom time was always money and opportunities had to be seized immediately. Jack's patience was a strange phenomenon in his world. "Barbara," he addressed his assistant, who had remained silent, processing all the information, "please prepare the boardroom. and summon all available directors for an urgent meeting. Also, make sure that Attorney Martinez is received immediately upon his arrival." Barbara nodded and quickly left the office, but not before casting a final incredulous look at Jack, the farmer who had arrived covered in dust and who now turned out to be the new owner of the bank. Once alone, Edward rose and approached the window, observing the rain that was now falling heavily on the city. After a moment of contemplation, he turned toward Jack. "Mr. Miller, I must be honest with you. This bank is not just a business. It's an institution with a long history and thousands of employees who depend on its stability. The decisions you make as majority shareholder will affect many lives." Jack also stood up and approached the window, positioning himself next to Edward. For an instant, both observed the city, wrapped in the storm, a panorama of diffuse lights and buildings blurred by the curtain of water. "My ranch is small, Mr. Wilson, but it provides work for 15 families. I understand what responsibility toward those who depend on one means. Perhaps the scale is different, but the principle is the same." Edward looked at Jack with new respect. Perhaps he thought this unexpected turn of fate wasn't the catastrophe he had initially feared. Perhaps beneath that rustic appearance, Mr. Foster had identified qualities that Edward himself, blinded by prejudice, hadn't been able to see at first glance. "In that case," Edward finally said, extending his hand, "welcome to the National Credit Bank of America, Mr. Miller." The handshake that followed sealed much more than a simple protocol greeting. It was the beginning of a new era for the financial institution, an era that no one could have foreseen when that gray morning began. The boardroom on the top floor was an imposing space. A massive mahogany oval table dominated the center, surrounded by black leather executive chairs. The windows offered a privileged view of the city, although now they only showed the gray veil of the incessant rain. 12 people occupied their places around the table, all wearing impeccable suits and expressions that oscillated between incredulity and concern. Jack Miller sat at one end of the table, flanked by Edward Wilson and attorney Robert Martinez, a man in his 60s with silver hair and fine-rimmed glasses. The farmer's presence among so many executives created an almost surreal contrast, as if two completely alien worlds had collided by caprice of destiny. "Ladies and gentlemen of the Board of Directors," began Edward Wilson, standing up, "I have convened you urgently to present Mr. Jack Miller, great-nephew of our late founder, Mr. Alexander Foster, and according to the recently opened will, heir to 60% of the bank's shares." A murmur ran through the table. Richard Lawrence, financial director and shareholder with a 5% stake, was the first to break the formal silence. "With all due respect, Edward, this is absurd. Mr. Foster never mentioned having family in... Where do you say you live?" He addressed Jack directly with a condescending tone. "In Cedar Creek, Kentucky," replied Jack simply, unfazed by the evident disdain. "Kentucky!" exclaimed Lawrence with a dry laugh. "Mr. Foster, the most sophisticated financier in America, leaving his empire to a rancher from Kentucky. It must be a joke." Attorney Martinez cleared his throat softly before speaking. "I assure you there is no joke, Mr. Lawrence. As Mr. Foster's personal executor for the last 30 years, I can confirm the authenticity of the will and Mr. Miller's legitimacy as majority heir." Martinez opened his briefcase and extracted several documents that he distributed among those present. "Here you have copies of the certified will, the birth certificate of Mrs. Rose Foster, Mr. Miller's mother, and Mr. Foster's niece, as well as the genealogical study that confirms the kinship." While the executives examined the documents with evident consternation, Martinez continued, "Mr. Foster confided to me some years ago that he had been following the life of his niece Rose from a distance, respecting her decision to break with the family, but never ceasing to worry about her and her descendants." This revelation caught everyone's attention, including Jack, who listened with visible emotion to this part of his family history that he was unaware of. Mr. Foster never approved of how his brother, Rose's father, treated her when she decided to marry a humble man, explained Martinez. But being the younger brother and having less influence at that time, he couldn't intervene. However, I know that he maintained private investigators to follow Rose's life and subsequently Jack's, receiving regular reports about their circumstances. Jack felt his eyes moistening as he imagined that unknown great-uncle watching over them from the shadows all those years. And why did he never approach them directly? Asked Susan Hernandez, the public relations director, genuinely intrigued by this story that seemed taken from a soap opera. Martinez smiled wistfully. Mr. Foster was a complex man, Susan. He had his reasons. But what I can tell you is that in our private conversations during his last days, he confessed his admiration for how Jack had managed his small ranch, how he had weathered droughts and economic crises with integrity, without resorting to abusive loans or abandoning his workers in difficult times. Edward Wilson observed the reactions of the directors as they assimilated this information. Some were beginning to look at Jack with curiosity instead of disdain. "Ladies and gentlemen," intervened Jack, speaking for the first time since the meeting began. His voice, although lacking the formal education of his interlocutors, conveyed a quiet confidence. "I understand your doubts and concerns. I myself am just assimilating all this. I never sought riches or power. My life has been dedicated to working the land my parents left me. But if my great-uncle Mr. Foster trusted me to continue his legacy, I must honor that trust." He paused, looking directly at each person present. "I don't claim to come and revolutionize what I don't know. That wouldn't be sensible. I'm aware of my limitations regarding the financial world. That's why my intention is to learn from you, who know this business, while you perhaps can learn something from my experience managing limited resources and caring for the people who depend on me." The sincerity in his words was so unusual in that environment of calculated corporate strategies that for a moment no one knew how to respond. It was Dr. Elena Monroe, director of the legal department and the most senior member of the board, who broke the silence. "Mr. Miller, your honesty is refreshing, and if Mr. Foster chose you, we must respect his decision. But the practical question remains. What plans do you have for the bank?" Jack nodded, acknowledging the validity of the question. "My immediate plan is simple, Dr. Monroe. Observe, listen, and learn. I won't make hasty decisions based on my current ignorance." However, his gaze became more intense. "There are values that I consider universal, whether one administers a ranch or a bank. Honesty, respect for those who work for you, and responsibility toward the community one serves." Edward Wilson, who had remained silent observing the dynamics, intervened then. "I propose that over the next 3 months, Mr. Miller receive intensive training on all aspects of the banking business. Each department director will explain their area, the current challenges and opportunities. Meanwhile, we'll continue operating as until now, without drastic changes, but keeping him informed of all important decisions." The proposal was met with generalized nods. It was a practical solution. That bought time for everyone, including Jack, to adapt to the new reality. "It seems reasonable to me," agreed Jack. "Although I'd like to add something more." All eyes turned to him. "I'd like part of my training to include visits to the smaller branches, not just the central offices. I want to meet the staff who work in direct contact with the customers, understand their needs and challenges." This request surprised several of those present. It was unusual for a top executive, much less the owner, to show interest in the most basic operational levels. "Also," continued Jack, "I'd like to meet some of the small customers, the merchants, the artisans, the small farmers who depend on this bank's credits to subsist. They are the backbone of our economy, although they're often forgotten." Richard Lawrence, who had initially been the most skeptical, now observed Jack with renewed interest. "Surprisingly, Mr. Miller, that perspective could be valuable. We've been discussing for years how to improve our penetration in the rural and small business sector, but we lack direct knowledge of those realities." The meeting continued for almost 2 more hours, discussing practical, legal, and logistical aspects of the transition. By the time it concluded, Chicago's sky had begun to clear, the storm giving way to a sunset that tinged the clouds with golden and purple tones. Jack was now in the office that had belonged to Mr. Foster, an elegant but sober room with shelves full of books and some old photographs. Attorney Martinez had taken him there to deliver something personal. "Mr. Foster left this specifically for you," said the lawyer, handing him an envelope sealed with wax. "He asked me to give it to you in private once everything was clarified with the board of directors." Jack took the envelope with slightly trembling hands. He opened it carefully and extracted a handwritten letter and an old sepia photograph. The photograph showed a young man next to a girl of about 16, both smiling at the camera. With amazement, he recognized in the young woman his mother, Rose, and assumed the young man must be Mr. Foster. The letter, written in an elegant but firm calligraphy, began like this: "Dear Jack, when you read these lines, I will no longer be in this world. We never had the opportunity to meet personally, one of the great regrets of my life. But I have followed you from a distance, seeing how you became the honorable and hard-working man you are today. Your mother, my dear niece Rose, was always the most authentic and brave person I knew. When she decided to follow her heart and marry your father, a man without fortune but rich in values, the family repudiated her. I was too young then to intervene, but I never agreed with that cruel decision. Over the years, while building this bank, I never forgot the lesson Rose taught me, that a person's true value is not in their bank account, but in their integrity and their capacity to love and work honestly. I bequeath this bank to you not only because you are my closest relative, but because I have seen in you those same qualities. Where others see just a rancher, I see a man who has known how to manage limited resources with wisdom, treat his workers with respect, and remain faithful to his principles even in difficult times. The financial world may seem very different from yours, but in essence the principles are the same: honesty, hard work, and respect for people. I trust that you will know how to surround yourself with competent people for the technical aspects, while you provide the moral compass that is sometimes lost in the high spheres of economic power. My only regret is not having had the courage to approach you and your family in life. Perhaps I feared being rejected, or perhaps I allowed myself to be trapped too much in my own world. But I hope this legacy serves as a bridge between those two worlds that should never have been separated. With affection and trust, Alexander Foster. When he finished reading, Jack discovered that tears were freely flowing down his cheeks, weathered by the sun. That letter revealed not only the reason for his unexpected inheritance, but also a part of his family history that had remained hidden for decades. "Mr. Foster talked a lot about you in his last days," commented Attorney Martinez softly, respecting the emotion of the moment. "He said that in a world obsessed with appearances and material success, you represented fundamental values that are being lost. I believe his hope was that you could bring some of that wisdom to the financial world." Jack nodded, drying his tears, without shame. "I'll do everything possible to honor his trust," he said simply. As he put away the letter and the photograph in his vest, right over his heart, Jack approached the window. Chicago stretched before him, vast and full of lights that were beginning to turn on at dusk. A new and unknown world that now, by a twist of fate, was connected to his. He then remembered how that morning he had arrived covered in dust from the road with his worn but dignified clothes, and how they had looked at him with disdain until they discovered who he really was. How many doors remain closed in life, he thought, just by judging people by their appearance, without giving them the opportunity to show their true value. "Tomorrow," he said aloud, although he was speaking more to himself than to Martinez, "I'd like to visit the bank's smallest branch first, the one that serves the most humble customers. I want to begin my learning there." The lawyer smiled, recognizing in that simple request the confirmation that Mr. Foster had not been mistaken in choosing his heir. The true legacy wasn't the bank's shares or the imposing buildings, but the values that Jack would bring with him from his ranch in Kentucky to the high spheres of financial power. And so, as the sun finished setting on the horizon of the big city, a new era began for the National Credit Bank of America, an era in which perhaps doors would open more easily for everyone, regardless of appearances or the dust from the road. Dear listeners, we hope that Jack Miller's story has moved and left you with a lesson about not judging by appearances. To continue this emotional journey, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories about extraordinary people who change their destiny against all odds. Find it here by clicking to your left. If you liked this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give the video a like. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the complexity of American life, with its traditions, values, and the wisdom that we sometimes find in the most unexpected places. We'll be waiting for you in the comments to tell us if you've ever been unfairly judged by your appearance, or if you know someone like Jack, whose humility hides exceptional greatness. See you tomorrow with a new story.